Malik Carter was no ordinary college student. Known for his intelligence, eloquence, and deep understanding of history, he was respected among his peers. His passion for justice and equality made him a prominent voice on campus, often engaging in discussions about culture, identity, and race. Whenever Malik spoke, people listened not just because of his confidence, but because of the undeniable truth in his words. That evening, the university hosted an open discussion on cultural identity, a forum meant to encourage students to share their perspectives. The room was packed with students from different backgrounds, all eager to engage in the conversation. Some attended to learn, while others, like Jessica Whitman, came with a different motive. Jessica was well known on campus, but not for good reasons. Coming from a wealthy and privileged background, she often dismissed discussions about racial inequality, believing them to be exaggerated. She wasn't afraid to voice her opinions, no matter how offensive they were. Many students avoided arguing with her because they knew it was pointless. She thrived on conflict, always trying to provoke reactions. The discussion had been going well, with students exchanging thoughts on cultural heritage and the significance of diversity in America. Malik, as usual, spoke with clarity, dismantling misconceptions with facts. But as he finished making a point about the importance of Black identity in American history, Jessica scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Oh please," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "If you care so much about being Black, why don't you just go back to Africa?" A heavy silence filled the room. The words hung in the air like a slap. Some students gasped, others exchanged uneasy glances. Even those who usually stayed neutral looked shocked by her blatant racism. Jessica smirked, sitting back in her chair with an air of satisfaction, as if she had just delivered the final blow in an argument she believed she had won. She expected Malik to fumble, to react angrily, or to be left speechless, but instead, he simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. The room was still. All eyes were on Malik. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone, and they waited to see how he would respond. The room remained eerily silent, the weight of Jessica's words pressing down on everyone. A few students exchanged uneasy glances, their faces reflecting a mix of shock and discomfort. Some gasped, while others shifted in their seats, clearly unsettled by what had just been said. Yet, no one immediately spoke up. It was as if time had momentarily frozen, trapping everyone in the tension-filled atmosphere. Malik sat still, his expression unreadable. He took a slow, measured breath, steadying himself. His mind worked quickly, not with anger, but with clarity. He had faced ignorance before, but something about Jessica's words, spoken with such confidence, with such cruel intent, made this moment different. He could feel the anticipation in the air. Everyone was waiting to see how he would react. Jessica, meanwhile, leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. She believed she had won, that she had silenced him, that her words had cut too deep for a response. In her mind, the debate was over, but she was wrong. Malik wasn't defeated. He was preparing. The storm was coming, and Jessica had no idea what was about to hit her. Malik finally spoke, his voice steady and composed. He didn't raise it, nor did he show any sign of anger. Instead, he leaned forward slightly and looked directly at Jessica. "Tell me, Jessica," he said, his tone almost conversational, "what do you actually know about Africa?" Jessica blinked, caught off guard. She opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated. "Do you know about the great empires of Mali and Songhai, where scholars gathered to study medicine, astronomy, and philosophy, centuries before European universities even existed? Have you heard of the kingdom of Kush, where queens and kings ruled with power and intelligence. Do you know that some of the earliest mathematical systems and architectural marvels came from African civilizations? The room remained silent, but the tension had shifted. Some students leaned in, absorbing his words. A few nodded in agreement, their expressions changing as they realized the depth of what Malik was saying. He continued, his voice unwavering. History didn't start with European conquest. In fact, it was Europeans who invaded Africa, stole its resources, enslaved its people, and then rewrote history to make it seem as if Africa had given nothing to the world. Jessica's smirk had vanished. Malik wasn't just answering her, he was exposing her ignorance for everyone to see. Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her seat, trying to regain control. That's not, she began, but Malik didn't let her finish. His voice, calm yet commanding, cut through the room. You want to tell me to go back to Africa, as if I don't belong here, he said, his eyes locked onto hers. But let's be clear, America was built on the backs of African slaves. My ancestors were kidnapped, brought here in chains, and forced to labor under inhumane conditions. They bled and suffered to build this country. So if anyone has a right to be here, it's us. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some students who had been quiet now nodded in agreement. A voice from the back added, "Yeah, he's right." Another student leaned forward and said, "You can't just erase history, Jessica." Jessica's confidence was crumbling. The smirk was gone, replaced by a growing discomfort. She looked around, realizing that she was no longer in control of the conversation. Looked around, realizing that she was no longer in control of the conversation. The students weren't laughing with her, they were turning against her. Malik didn't need to humiliate her. The truth itself was doing the job, and for the first time, Jessica seemed to understand the weight of her words. Malik took a deep breath, his confidence unwavering. He could see the impact of his words on the crowd, and he knew this was an opportunity to educate, not just to win an argument. He turned his focus back to Jessica. You act as if black people haven't contributed to this country, to the world, he said, his tone even but firm. Let me remind you of a few names. He paused for a moment, then continued. Frederick Douglass, a man who escaped slavery and became one of the greatest intellectuals and abolitionists in American history. Harriet Tubman, who risked her life repeatedly to free hundreds of enslaved people. Martin Luther King Jr., who led a movement that changed the course of this nation. Are you saying these people didn't belong here? Jessica remained silent, her face turning red, but Malik wasn't done. He looked around the room, addressing everyone. And what about black inventors and scholars? Do you know that Dr. Charles Drew pioneered blood transfusion technology, saving millions of lives? That George Washington Carver revolutionized agriculture? That Katherine Johnson's calculations were vital for NASA's space missions? The students were fully engaged, now, nodding, murmuring in agreement. Even those who had been quiet seemed to be absorbing every word. Jessica looked around, realizing she had no argument left. A voice came from the side of the room. Well said. It was Professor Richardson, a respected history professor, who had been listening the entire time. Malik, your response was not only articulate, but deeply factual. This is exactly the kind of dialogue that pushes society forward. The crowd erupted into applause. Some students clapped slowly, others enthusiastically. A few even stood up. Malik had done more than just defend himself. He had educated everyone in the room. Jessica, meanwhile, looked humiliated. The arrogance she had displayed earlier was gone, replaced by discomfort and shame. She avoided eye contact with anyone, shrinking back in her seat. Malik hadn't needed to insult her. He hadn't needed to yell. The truth had been more powerful than any insult could ever be. And as the applause continued, it was clear that everyone in the room knew exactly who had won this exchange. The debate might have ended in that room, but the conversation was far from over. Unbeknownst to Malik, someone in the audience had recorded the entire exchange and uploaded it online. Within hours, the video spread across social media like wildfire. People were sharing, commenting, and praising Malik for his calm yet powerful response. His words resonated beyond the walls of the university, reaching thousands then millions of viewers. Meanwhile, Jessica found herself at the center of intense backlash. Students on campus distanced themselves from her, unwilling to be associated with her ignorance. Her name trended online for all the wrong reasons, and messages flooded her social media, calling her out for her racist remark. The university administration was quick to respond, releasing an official statement condemning discrimination and reaffirming their commitment to diversity and inclusion. Some even called for disciplinary action against her. Malik, however, remained focused. He hadn't spoken to go viral. He had spoken because it was necessary. But as he saw the overwhelming support from students and even strangers online, he realized the impact of what had happened. Other black students reached out to him, thanking him for standing up and voicing what so many had felt but hadn't been able to express. His courage gave them confidence to speak up against discrimination in their own lives. The university invited Malik to participate in further discussions on race and history. He became a leading voice in student activism, organizing events and pushing for meaningful change. Professors commended him, and students, regardless of race, looked up to him as a role model. Jessica, on the other hand, had a choice to make. She could either remain stubborn in her ignorance or learn from this experience. Whether she would change was unknown, but one thing was certain: she would never again underestimate the power of knowledge and truth. As for Malik, this was just the beginning. He knew the fight for equality wasn't won in a single debate, nor was racism dismantled overnight. But he also knew that words had power, and he intended to keep using his voice to challenge injustice, educate others, and advocate for a better future. Walking through campus the next day, he noticed something different. People greeted him with respect, admiration even, not because he had embarrassed someone, but because he had spoken truth to power. And in that moment, he knew he had made a difference.